Thank you, David, for allowing myself and on behalf of Scotiabank to be part of this presentation. As you know, bank benefits directly from David's leadership and expertise in his role on the board of the bank. But I just wanted to mention one other example. We also benefit through his role on the Institute of International Finance and the Market Monitoring Group, and David's work today looking at issues of financial sector stability. And that's just, for me, one example of his continuing contribution to very complex global public policy issues. So on behalf of Scotiabank, I'd like to join the Couchiching membership in presenting this award to you.
Well, David and Ross, thank you very much. And I want to thank the Institute and all members of the board and the selection committee. This is a real honor for me to join that list of people, a number of whom, Mike Wilson, Sylvia Austrie, Fraser Mustard, I actually worked closely with at some point in my life. So it's a real honor for me to be part of that group. And it's also very personal because when I was a boy, my parents had a cottage just down the lake here, and I used to sit in the afternoons. At that point, CBC used to broadcast the proceedings. So I would sit on the dock with this portable radio that was about this big at the time, with a battery which is about that big to make it go. Sit on the dock. I could actually look up the lake and see Geneva Park and listen to what people were saying. So my connection goes back over 65 years with this particular gathering at this particular place. So it's a real personal pleasure for me to accept this, and I really do want to thank you all. Now, you know, I had nothing to do with the Arab Spring. So it's a little anomalous that it's in the context of the Arab Spring discussion, which we've been having, that I'm here today. But, you know, I go back to what Remy Curry's description of the macro drivers of the Arab Spring. And it essentially was the struggle for the rights and responsibilities of citizenship, both individually and collectively. Or putting it a little differently, using some of the work that has been done by a group at CFAR, it really was to replace extractive institutions with inclusive ones. And any of you who've not read the book by Asimoglu and Robinson, Why Nations Fail, I would recommend that to you. Certainly, it's a really good history of much of the institution building and what lay behind it. And certainly, the remarks today that what is amazing about the Arab Spring is the attempt to compress into 1 or 2 years what took Britain or the United States or Canada literally hundreds of years to develop. That, of course, is the risk as well when it comes so fast. But as Rami said this morning, in the end, these new regimes are going to have to deliver. Ahmed said that to us last night as well. And it's that delivery which is the essence, really, of public policy and public administration. And here in Canada, we really are lucky. We're lucky not only that we live in a country where we can have meetings just like this that we're having today. But we're lucky we live in a country where governments really can concentrate on the delivery of that public policy because over many years and through a lot of difficult period, we've established some of the ground rules for institutions which are certainly by global standards pretty inclusive. And so, but what we also know is that inclusivity of the institutions, that good citizenship, that does depend on the exercise of that citizenship, not only by people individually, but by the nation collectively through its public policy in its collective institutions, whether they be federal government, provincial governments, or local governments. And I've been lucky enough, being born at the right time in many ways, to work in government institutions at a time when we really could spend our time fully concentrating on the policy, on the delivery, and not have to struggle either in foreign wars or struggle domestically to establish the ground rules on which that would operate. And I've been really lucky to have the privilege then to work to try to meet the challenges in a number of areas in labor markets, in health policy, in fiscal policy, where I spent a lot of time working with Mike Wilson, one of our previous award winners, and on the monetary and financial side, including pensions. So that it's really been a terrific privilege to be able to do that. But what I thought I would do today is just to say a few words, very few words, about another aspect of policy which we really have to focus on over the next little while in order to preserve the economic and political union which we have in Canada, because I think circumstances are such that there is tremendous pressure on our union at the moment. And that union is an economic union, it's a social union, it's a transfer union, and all those aspects come together. And indeed, now that I work for a law firm, I'm going to start by talking about what's in the law, our Constitution. Section 36 of our Constitution really talks about this because it commits all governments to promote, quote, equal opportunities, further economic development to reduce disparity, and provide essential public services of reasonable quality to all Canadians. That's part one of Section 36 of our Constitution. It's very important. And that has been, well, it's not been a written part of the Constitution since the original BNA Act. Nevertheless, that is indeed been a fundamental part of the governance of this country. And the push and pull of different regions and different contributions. Indeed, I come of a lineage, my great-grandfather was a member of Joseph Howe's cabinet when Joseph Howe tried to take Nova Scotia out of Confederation because it wasn't going to be made the milk cow of Upper Canada. But we've had this push and pull all through our history. Section 36(2), Part 2 of the Constitution, enshrines what we've known as our aspirational equalization principle, in that provincial government should have, quote, sufficient revenues to provide reasonably comparable levels of public services at reasonably comparable levels of taxation, close quote. Now, that's our aspiration, that's what's there in the Constitution, and that's what we've been trying to live with through our policy actions, federal and provincial, for a long period of time. But fundamental shifts in the global and hence our Canadian economy will make it increasingly difficult to realize the equalization principle in the decade ahead without damaging the real economy and without, in so doing, actually threatening national unity. And consistent then with the overarching spirit of Section 36, a more productive and perhaps less divisive objective for the federal government would be to try to ensure that all provinces actually possess the fiscal capacity themselves to provide public services of reasonable quality, as it says in Section 36.1, while making investments that build the fiscal capacity of lower income provinces and reduce disparity through further economic development. Now that is an extraordinary challenge for us. Why is it so extraordinary? Well, two prevailing market forces are of fundamental importance. One is the projected continuing growth of emerging market economies, particularly China, but certainly not confined to China, which will continue to boost global demand for a wide range of commodities and at the same time will boost the supply of competitively priced manufacturers and services. The result has been a marked shift in the terms of trade away from manufactured goods and services towards natural resources. A shift which has been to the benefit of Canada as a whole, but has very different impact on the regions within Canada, and hence the difficulty in trying to cope with this from a national unity perspective. The negative impact of the changed terms of trade on Canadian manufacturers has been reinforced by a second important factor in the current global economy, and that is continued slow growth in U.S. demand in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And not only that, beyond the general malaise of slow growth and unemployment in the U.S., of particular importance to this province, Ontario, is the continuing southward shift in the locus of North American manufacturing and automotive assembly away from the Michigan, Ohio, Ontario nexus to the southern U.S. Mexico nexus. In addition, Ontario-based manufacturers face a loss of cost competitiveness due to the appreciation of the Canadian dollar and the rising Canadian dollar unit labor cost in comparison to the U.S., i.e., we've just been jacking up our wages and salaries faster in Canada in nominal terms than in the U.S. Now, the ultimate impact of this is going to be a continuing divergence of the fiscal capacities between resource-rich provinces and the rest of Canada, and a continuing fall in Ontario's share of the national economy below its share of population. And that indeed will be the first time that that has happened since Confederation. Now, Ontario's new status in the consistently growing interprovincial income gap between the 4 have and the 6 have-not provinces will create unprecedented and uncontrollable challenges for us. I mean, what basically happens is we have more or less over time had 4 have provinces. And those 4 have provinces have represented 2/3 or 70% of the population and a little more than that of the national economy. We still have 4 have provinces The trouble is they now represent less than 35% of the national economy. And so the big challenge, when you think about just the arithmetic, and we've got a young mathematician in the crowd from Queens, so he'll correct me if I'm wrong. The big problem with this is that the federal government, which supplies equalization under Section 36(2), raises its tax base, excludes natural resource revenues. And so, if you say, well, okay, the feds could just tax more and do the equalization. The trouble is, they're in chasing their tails because the federal tax base is exactly the same as the Ontario tax base. And so, you can't do anything about the shift that has happened through that mechanism. So this conundrum really does raise new and different political challenges. Remember, we are a political, monetary, economic, and social union, and transfers play an important role in preserving the integrity of that union, as the Europeans are finding out, much to their chagrin, not having the transfer mechanism. But not just in terms of promoting equal opportunity and ensuring the provision of basic services to all, but also in terms of minimizing the instability when the inevitable economic cycles produce adverse and unequal regional impacts. And we've seen those things can change a lot over time. And indeed, we in Ontario benefited from the mid-1980s until the early part of the 2000s from extraordinarily low commodity prices. And so relatively buoyant manufacturing. So this transfer mechanism is important, but what's also really important is, so it is important, but it can be counterproductive, and it's counterproductive to the extent that the transfer mechanism masks inexorable structural change and delays necessary adaptation and creates the illusion that the unsustainable can somehow be sustained indefinitely. Ultimately, these transfers can destroy unity through the generation of resentment, disrespect, and distrust. And we heard a lot about the importance of trust this morning. For in the long run, unions, that is, economic unions or political unions, can be sustained only when all members possess the ability and the will to fully participate and make a contribution. Equalization is important, but it's a zero-sum game. And it increasingly generates more resentment than satisfaction. Adopting some or all of the technical changes that the Prime Minister left it to the provinces to figure out can mitigate the problem, but they cannot and will not produce a sustainable solution to today's unprecedented challenge. The challenge is not just cyclical and destined to quickly disappear, but structural and long-term in nature. Indeed, I think the solution probably lies elsewhere. Through less focus on equality or comparability and more on the quality or adequacy of public services. Through less focus on federal transfers that redistribute income to equalize fiscal capacity, and more on federal investments that will create more income and build the fiscal capacity of today's lower income provinces. Through pursuing policies that in general promote positive provincial convergence and development of competitive manufacturing and service industries, and in particular reflect the practical reality that Canada's economic prosperity and political equilibrium ultimately depends on the strength of all provinces especially on populous Ontario. In short, as we try to work through these problems, and we're committed to work through them over the next 2 years, the federal government is committed to work through them over the next 2 years. It's really important to look outside of the equalization and transfers box, i.e. the narrow confines of Section 36(2) of the Constitution Act, to the broader objectives of 36(1). This is the challenge that our governments and we collectively are going to face over the next few years, and it's going to require the sort of discussion, debate, and compromise to make it work, the sort of discussion that we actually have here at Couchiching. And I hope, David, that at Rima, at some future Couchiching conference, we will be able to have the adult conversation which Canada needs on this particular issue. Thank you very much.